The crystal towers of Ethermoor reached toward the twin suns like frozen lightning. Inside the highest spire, 12 ancient elves sat in a perfect circle around a floating table made of pure starlight. Their robes rustled softly as they turned, their attention to the young elf standing in the center of their chamber. Lyrelei Moonwhisper clutched a worn leather book against her chest. Her silver hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes blazed with desperate urgency. At 127 years old, she was barely considered an adult by elven standards, yet she had spent the last decade studying texts that most elves had forgotten existed. "Honored Council," Lyrelei began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I have found proof of the ancient warnings. The devourers from the void are real, and they are coming." Counselor Sylvanus, the eldest among them, raised one pale eyebrow. His face was so old it looked like carved marble, and his eyes held the coldness of deep space. "Child, we have heard these tales before. They are stories told to frighten younglings into obedience." Lyrelei opened her book and held up a page covered in symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the light. "This is not a story. These are star charts from the last great war, written in the old tongue. They show exactly where the enemy came from and where they will return." The council members exchanged glances that spoke of patience wearing thin. Counselor Evelyn, her golden hair adorned with small gems, leaned forward with a condescending smile. "Lyrelei, dear child, your enthusiasm for history is admirable, but these are troubled times. Our people need hope, not ancient fears." "But the signs are already here," Lyrelei insisted, turning to another page. "Dead systems on the outer rim. Planets stripped of all life, radio silence from colonies that were thriving just months ago. The patterns match exactly what happened 3,000 years ago." Elder Thalorian, who had taught Lyrelei since she was 50 years old, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His kind eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw the conflict there. He believed her, but he could not speak against the council's will. Counselor Sylvanus stood up, his height impressive even by elven standards. "Enough! We will not allow panic to spread through our people based on ancient superstitions. The outer systems face many dangers: pirates, natural disasters, equipment failures. There is no need to invoke mythical monsters." Lyrelei felt her, heartbreaking as she looked around the circle. These were the wisest elves in their civilization, yet they refused to see the truth that was right in front of them. "Please, just send a scout ship to investigate. Look at the evidence with your own eyes." "The matter is closed," Sylvanus declared. "You will cease this research immediately and destroy these books. They serve no purpose except to spread fear." The words hit Lyrelei like a physical blow. "Destroy them? These are the only records left from the last war. If we lose this knowledge, we will be defenseless when they return." Counselor Marcus, a middle-aged elf with dark hair and suspicious eyes, spoke up. "When they return? You speak as if this fantasy is certain fact. Perhaps you have spent too much time alone with Dusty, books, and not enough time in the real world." Lyrelei's hands shook as she clutched the book tighter. "I have dedicated my life to understanding our history. Everything I have found points to the same conclusion. The devourers follow a pattern. They sleep for thousands of years, then wake when galactic civilization reaches a certain level. That time is now." The council erupted in whispers and murmurs. Some members looked annoyed, others appeared concerned, but none seemed convinced. Sylvanus raised his hand for silence. "Lyrelei Moonwhisper, you are hereby charged with spreading dangerous propaganda and refusing to obey the direct orders of this council. You are banned from all libraries and archives. You are forbidden from discussing these theories with anyone. And you are exiled from Ethermoor until such time as you abandon these delusions." The words echoed through the chamber, like thunder. Exile was the worst punishment short of death for any elf. To be cut off from their homeworld, from their people, from everything they held sacred, was almost unbearable. Elder Thalorin started to rise from his seat, his mouth opening to protest, but Sylvanus fixed him with a stare that could freeze starlight. The old teacher sank back down, his face filled with anguish. Lyrelei felt tears running down her cheeks, but she held her head high. "I will not abandon the truth, no matter what it costs me. When the devourers come, remember this moment. Remember that you chose ignorance over wisdom." She turned and walked toward the chamber doors, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. As she reached the exit, she heard Elder Thalarin's voice, barely a whisper. "Take the northern route to the spaceport. Be careful, child." It was a small kindness, but it meant everything to her. The northern route would avoid the crowds and the questions she was not ready to answer. 3 hours later, Lirayli stood in the docking bay next to a small scout ship that would be her home for who knew how long. She had packed everything she owned into 2 bags and hidden copies of the most important texts in secret compartments throughout the ship. The docking supervisor, an old elf named Garrett, handed her the departure papers with sad eyes. "I am sorry, young one. Many of us remember the old stories our grandparents told. Perhaps there is more truth in them than the council wishes to believe." Lirelei managed a small smile. "Thank you for your kindness. If I am right, I will find proof. If I am wrong, at least I will have tried." As her ship lifted off from Ethermore's surface, Lirelei looked back at the crystal towers one last time. Somewhere in those spires were the people who had raised her, taught her, and now cast her out. But also, somewhere in the galaxy, was an enemy that would make them all pay for their blindness. She set course for the outer rim, where dead worlds waited to tell their stories to anyone brave enough to listen. The scanner beside her pilot's seat beeped softly, already detecting strange energy readings from the direction she was heading. The hunt for truth had begun. 3 months of lonely travel through the void had changed Lirelei in ways she never expected. Her once pristine robes were now practical flight suits, and her soft hands had grown calloused from ship maintenance. She had visited 7 dead systems, each one confirming her worst fears. The evidence was undeniable, but she was running out of fuel and hope. The distress signal she had been broadcasting for weeks finally received an answer, but not from anyone she expected. The ship that appeared on her scanner was unlike anything in the Elven databases. It was angular, where Elven ships were curved, metal where theirs were crystal, and it moved with a purpose that seemed almost aggressive. Captain Lisa Zhang studied the unknown vessel on her main screen with growing curiosity. In her 15 years exploring the galaxy, she had encountered dozens of alien species, but this ship design was completely new. The vessel was beautiful in an ethereal way, with sweeping lines that seemed to flow like liquid mercury. "Amy, what do you make of it?" Lisa asked her second-in-command. Commander Amy Rodriguez was already running scans from her position at the tactical station. Her dark eyes focused intently on the readouts. Single occupant, minimal weapons, and she is definitely in distress. Life support is failing and her fuel reserves are almost empty. Dr. Samantha Cole looked up from the science station, her blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail. "The energy signatures are fascinating. They are using some kind of organic technology I have never seen before. It is like the ship is partially alive." Lieutenant Maya Patel, the communications officer, was working furiously at her console. Her fingers danced over the controls as she tried to establish contact. "I am picking up transmissions, but the language is completely unknown. The syntax is incredibly complex, almost like music." Lisa made her decision quickly. "Bring them aboard. We can sort out communication issues once we know they are safe." The docking procedure took almost an hour, because the 2 ship designs were so different. When the airlock finally opened, the humans got their first look at an elf, and Lirelei got her first look at beings she had only heard about in ancient legends. Lirelei stepped into the human ship and immediately felt the difference. Where elven vessels hummed with natural energy, this ship buzzed with mechanical precision. The walls were lined with screens and control panels that flickered with information, and the beings standing before her were unlike anything she had imagined. They were shorter than elves, with broader builds and skin that came in shades of brown and tan instead of the pale silver of her people. Their ears were rounded instead of pointed, and their eyes held a warmth that was both curious and cautious. Captain Zhang stepped forward with her hands open in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Welcome aboard the Starbound Navigator. I am Captain Lisa Zhang." Lirelei understood nothing of the words, but the tone was kind. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed slightly. Lyrelay Moon Whisper, she said, then added in the old tongue, I bring warning of great danger. Maya worked frantically at a portable translator, cross-referencing the sounds with linguistic patterns from known languages. I think I am making progress. There are mathematical concepts embedded in her speech that might be universal. Dr. Cole approached with a medical scanner, moving slowly to avoid alarming their guest. She ran the device over Lyrelay without touching her, noting the readings with professional interest. She is definitely humanoid, but there are significant differences. Longer lifespan, different brain chemistry, and something that looks like natural genetic modifications. Over the next several hours, Maya managed to establish basic communication. It was slow and frustrating work, with lots of pointing, drawing, and attempts at simple concepts. But gradually, a picture began to emerge. Lyrelay was a scholar from a species called elves. She had been exiled for trying to warn her people about something terrible coming from beyond the galaxy. She had proof of an ancient enemy that had attacked before and was returning now. When Maya finally managed to translate the word devourers, a chill ran through the bridge crew. The way Lyrelay said it, with fear and urgency mixed together, made it clear this was not just another space pirate problem. Lisa called for a full briefing in the conference room. Lyrelay sat at one end of the long table, looking small and vulnerable despite her obvious intelligence. The humans arranged themselves around her, each trying to understand what they were dealing with. Tell us about these devourers, Lisa said, speaking slowly so Maya could translate. Lyrelay opened her precious book and showed them pages covered in star charts and symbols. As she spoke, Maya translated haltingly. They are ancient machines that eat worlds. They sleep for thousands of years, then wake up when civilizations grow too large. They came before when her people were young and destroyed almost everything. Dr. Cole leaned forward intently. What kind of machines? Are we talking about artificial intelligence or something more biological? The translation took several minutes, but Lyrelay's answer made everyone uncomfortable. Both and neither. They consume living matter and technology equally. They learn from what they eat and become stronger. Amy asked the question they were all thinking. How do we fight something like that? Lyrelay's expression grew sad as she explained. The old records say cooperation was the key. Many species working together, sharing knowledge and strength. But my people have forgotten. They think the past is just stories. Lisa made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Show us where you found evidence of these attacks. We need to see for ourselves. The journey to the nearest dead system took 2 days. During that time, the humans and the elf learned more about each other. Lyrelay was amazed by human technology, especially their computers and weapons. The humans were fascinated by elven biotechnology and their natural abilities with energy manipulation. Dr. Cole spent hours studying Lyrelay's books with the help of the translation system. These star charts are incredibly detailed. If they are accurate, they show the exact path of destruction from the last invasion. When they reached the Keth system, what they found silenced all doubts. 3 planets hung in space like stripped bones. Every trace of atmosphere was gone. The surfaces were scarred with perfectly geometric patterns, as if something had systematically harvested every atom of useful material. Amy stared at the tactical display in horror. What could do this? The energy requirements alone would be staggering. Lyrelay pointed to markings on one of her charts that matched the patterns on the dead worlds. Through Maya, she explained, they take everything organic first, then metals, then even the basic elements. They leave only rock and dust. Dr. Cole was recording everything with her sensors. The precision is incredible. This was not random destruction. It was industrial-scale harvesting. As they orbited the dead worlds, their long-range sensors detected something that made everyone's blood run cold. Far out in the dark between systems, massive shapes moved against the stars. They were too distant to see clearly, but the energy signatures were unmistakable. Something big is coming this way, Amy reported, her voice tight with tension. Multiple contacts moving in formation. Lisa did not hesitate. Set course for Earth, maximum speed, we need to warn everyone. As the starbound navigator jumped to faster-than-light travel, Lyrelay felt a mixture of hope and terror. She had finally found someone who believed her, but now the race against time had truly begun. The humans seemed capable and brave, but would it be enough against an enemy that had already destroyed countless civilizations? Behind them, in the darkness of space, the Devourer fleet continued its slow but inevitable advance toward the populated systems of the galaxy. The time of sleeping was over, and the harvest was about to begin. The Helios sector had once been home to the proud Zentari civilization. Their crystalline cities had sparkled like jewels across 12 worlds, and their art was famous throughout the galaxy. Now, as Admiral Kate Morrison's fleet dropped out of hyperspace, they found only silence and death. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UEV Vigilant, studying the tactical display with growing unease. She was a veteran of 3 major conflicts, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what they were seeing. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her blue eyes held the weight of command responsibility. "Report," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere on the bridge. Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez looked up from her console, her dark face pale with shock. "Admiral, we are detecting 12 planets in this system, but only 3 still have any mass above planetary core level. The others have been stripped down to bare rock." Dr. Nicole Taylor, the fleet's xenobiologist, was analyzing the sensor data with increasing alarm. "The energy patterns are unlike anything we have seen before. It looks like the planets were systematically disassembled from the surface down." Captain Lisa Zhang stood beside the Admiral, having been assigned as liaison since her crew had first contact with Lyrelai. "This matches exactly what Lyrelai warned us about. The Devourers do not just destroy, they harvest everything useful." Lyrelai herself was present on the bridge, wearing a human-made translation device that allowed real-time communication. Her elven features were drawn with exhaustion and grief. "This is how it begins. They take the outer systems first, building their strength before moving to the populated core worlds." Admiral Morrison had initially been skeptical of the elf's claims, but the evidence was overwhelming. "How long ago did this happen?" Lyrelai consulted readings from her own ship's sensors. Based on the energy decay patterns, no more than 6 months. The Zentari were still broadcasting trade offers to other systems as recently as 4 months ago. The implications hit everyone on the bridge like a physical blow. An entire civilization of 12 billion beings had been wiped out in just 2 months, and no one had even noticed until now. Commander Amy Rodriguez, who had been transferred to the Admiral's staff, spoke up from the communications station. "We are receiving long-range sensor contacts, multiple large objects approaching from the outer system." The main screen shifted to show distant shapes moving against the starfield. At first, they looked like asteroids or debris, but as the sensors focused, their true nature became clear. They were ships, but ships unlike anything in the known galaxy. The vessels were massive, each one easily 10 times the size of the largest human dreadnought. Their surfaces seemed to shift and flow like living tissue, but underneath was clearly artificial structure. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing mouths, and sensor arrays extended like grasping tentacles. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Taylor. "They are beautiful and horrible at the same time." Lyrelai's voice was heavy with ancient sorrow. "The old texts called them the Hungry Ones. They combine the worst aspects of machine intelligence with organic adaptability. Every world they consume makes them stronger and smarter." Admiral Morrison felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She had 47 ships under her command, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled for exploration. But looking at the approaching enemy, she realized they might as well be throwing pebbles at a mountain. All ships, battle stations, form defensive formation Alpha 7 around the research vessels. The human fleet spread out in a protective formation, their weapons powering up and shields activating. The technology was impressive by human standards: plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, and energy shields that could deflect most known weapons. The Devourer ships approached with deliberate slowness, as if they had all the time in the universe. When they finally came within weapons range, they stopped completely, hanging in space like predators studying their prey. "They are scanning us," reported Lieutenant Maya Patel from her sensor station. "The scanning beams are incredibly sophisticated. It feels like they are reading our technology manuals." Lyrelai moved to an auxiliary console and began working with equipment she had brought from her ship. I can disrupt their sensors temporarily. It is an old technique my people developed during the last war. She began what she called star singing, a process that seemed part technology and part mystical art. Her hands danced over crystal controls while she hummed in harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull. The effect was immediate. The Devourer ships began moving erratically, their formation breaking up as their sensors were overwhelmed by false signals and energy static. "Now!" Admiral Morrison ordered. "All ships, open fire." The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Plasma bolts, antimatter torpedoes, and particle beams converged on the enemy ships in a display of firepower that would have devastated any known vessel. The weapons struck the Devourer ships and simply disappeared. The organic hulls absorbed the energy like sponges, glowing briefly before returning to their normal appearance. Not a single enemy ship was even scratched. "Impossible," breathed Rosa Martinez. "Our sensors show the weapons are making contact, but there is no damage at all." The Devourers responded with weapons that defied understanding. Beams of what looked like liquid darkness reached out across space, touching human ships and simply making sections disappear. Not destroyed or vaporized, but deleted from existence as if they had never been there. The heavy cruiser Normandy took a direct hit and lost its entire forward section. The crew compartments were suddenly open to space, but the edges where the ship had been cut showed no signs of explosive damage or heat. The metal simply ended, as clean as if it had been designed that way. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Admiral Morrison ordered, but she knew it was useless. The enemy weapons seemed to ignore distance and defensive measures equally. Commander Rodriguez coordinated the retreat, while Lyrelay continued her star singing. The ancient elven technique was the only thing keeping the human fleet from being completely destroyed. But even that was just buying them time. Dr. Taylor was frantically analyzing the enemy technology. "Admiral, I think I understand what we are facing. These ships are not just machines, they are evolved. They have absorbed the technology and biological knowledge of hundreds of different species." As if to prove her point, one of the Devourer ships began changing shape. Its hull flowed like water, reconfiguring itself into a form that resembled a Zentari battlecruiser, but twisted and wrong. Weapons that had clearly been harvested from a dozen different civilizations sprouted from its surface. "They are learning from us right now," Lyrelay said, her concentration never breaking from her star singing. "Every attack we make teaches them more about our technology." Admiral Morrison made the hardest decision of her career. "All ships, full retreat. Jump to hyperspace immediately." The human fleet fled the Helios sector, leaving the Devourers in possession of another dead system. But as they escaped, long-range sensors detected the enemy fleet beginning to move, not randomly, but with clear purpose and direction. They were heading toward the populated core worlds of the galaxy. Earth, Ethermore, and 100 other civilizations lay directly in their path. During the hyperspace journey back to Earth, Admiral Morrison called for a full briefing. The senior officers gathered in the conference room, their faces showing the strain of their first encounter with humanity's greatest enemy. "Options," the Admiral said simply. "We need allies," Captain Zhang said immediately. "No single species can stand against this threat." Dr. Taylor nodded agreement. "The enemy adapts too quickly to conventional tactics. We need strategies they have never encountered before." Lyrelay spoke quietly but with absolute certainty. "The old records speak of unity as the only weapon that truly works against them. They cannot understand cooperation because they are driven only by hunger." Admiral Morrison looked around the table at the faces of her officers. They were scared, but not defeated. Humanity had faced seemingly impossible odds before and found a way to survive. Then we find that unity. We contact every species, every government, every military force in the galaxy. If cooperation is our weapon, then we make sure we have the largest army in galactic history. Outside the ship, hyperspace rushed past in streams of light and color. Behind them, the Devourer fleet continued its inexorable advance, consuming everything in its path. But ahead lay Earth, and with it, the hope that intelligence and cooperation might triumph over hunger and destruction. The return to Ethermore was the hardest thing Lyrelay had ever done. Standing in the same crystal chamber where she had been exiled just months earlier, She faced the High Council with Admiral Morrison and Captain Zhang at her side. But this time, the ancient elves were not sitting in judgment. They were listening with the desperate attention of beings who had realized their mistake too late. Elder Thaloran looked older than his 1,000 years, his usually perfect posture bent with the weight of guilt. Lyrelai, child, we have received reports from the outer territories. The silence from the Zentari worlds, the energy signatures our deep space sensors have detected. It seems your warnings were not stories after all. Counselor Sylvanus, who had led the charge for her exile, could barely meet her eyes. His marble-pale face was etched with lines of worry that had not been there before. The emergency session was called when our monitoring stations detected the approaching fleet. We estimate 3 weeks before they reach our outer defensive perimeter. Captain, Zhang stepped forward, her human directness cutting through elven formality. With respect, Counselor, we do not have time for regret. We need to focus on survival. Admiral Morrison activated a holographic display that showed the current galactic situation. Red markers indicated systems that had gone silent, while yellow ones showed refugee ships fleeing toward the galactic core. The enemy is advancing on multiple fronts. They have divided their fleet to attack several sectors simultaneously. Dr. Samantha Cole, who had spent weeks studying elven biotechnology, addressed the council with excitement barely contained beneath her professional demeanor. Your people's understanding of organic technology could be the key to developing effective countermeasures, but we need to work together, sharing everything we know. Lyrelai felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow as she watched her people struggle with the reality of their situation. The ancient archives contain more than just warnings. There are tactical manuals, technical specifications for weapons that were effective against the Devourers, and most importantly, the organizational structures that allowed different species to work together. Elder Thaloran gestured to a younger elf who had been standing silent in the background. This is Counselor Ariana, our new liaison for external affairs. She will coordinate our military response with your human forces. Ariana was barely 200 years old, young by elven standards, but her green eyes held an intelligence that impressed even the experienced human officers. I have been studying your military organization, Admiral Morrison. Your chain of command structure is remarkably efficient for a species that has only recently achieved interstellar capability. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Ambassador Claire Johnson was having similar conversations with dozens of other species. The elegant human diplomat had spent years building relationships with alien governments, but never for stakes this high. In the council chambers of New Rigel, she faced the insectoid Thraxians, whose compound eyes reflected her image in fractal patterns. The enemy does not distinguish between human, elf, or Thraxian. We are all potential food sources to them. The Thraxian queen speaker clicked her mandibles in what their translators rendered as thoughtful consideration. Your proposal has merit, Ambassador Johnson, but our ships are designed for completely different combat doctrines. How do you propose to coordinate attacks between species that think in fundamentally different ways? Claire had anticipated this. Question. We are not asking you to change your fighting style. We are asking you to use it as part of a larger strategy. Each species contributes what they do best. Similar scenes played out across known space as the word spread about the approaching threat. The crystalline Melodians offered their mastery of energy resonance. The mechanical constructors contributed their ability to rapidly build defensive installations. Even the normally isolationist gas giant dwellers agreed to provide their unique ships that could operate in environments deadly to other species. But the real breakthrough came when Commander Stephanie Liu, one of Earth's most gifted pilots, successfully flew an elven bioship in combat exercises above Ethermoor. The organic vessel responded to her thoughts and emotions in ways that no mechanical ship ever could. It is like the ship is alive, she reported to Admiral Morrison over the communication link. It anticipates what I want to do and adjusts its performance accordingly. Dr. Cole was monitoring the bioship's systems from the ground. The neural interface is incredible. The ship is actually learning from Commander Liu's flying style and adapting its responses. Lyrelai watched the exercises with growing hope. This is what the old records meant by unity. not just working together, but actually becoming something greater than the sum of our parts. The integration process was not without its problems. Human soldiers had to learn to work alongside elven warriors who fought with what appeared to be magic, but was actually highly advanced biotechnology. Elven commanders struggled to understand human tactical flexibility and willingness to take risks that seemed insane by elven standards. General Patricia Hayes, Earth's defense coordinator, was dealing with logistics nightmares as supply lines had to be established for dozens of different species with incompatible life support requirements. We have ships that breathe methane trying to coordinate with crews that need oxygen, all while planning attacks against an enemy that adapts to everything we throw at them. But gradually, the alliance began to take shape. Mixed crews served on hybrid ships that combined the best technology from multiple species. Communication protocols were established that could handle the linguistic complexity of coordinating between beings who thought in completely different ways. Dr. Helen Park, a brilliant scientist working with both human and elven researchers, made the discovery that would change everything. The Devourers have a weakness we did not expect. They cannot process truly cooperative behavior patterns. Their entire existence is based on consumption and dominance. When they encounter genuine mutual aid, their decision matrices become confused. Lyreley was studying the technical readouts with growing excitement. The old texts mention this, but I never understood what it meant. They called it the unity paradox. The Devourers cannot comprehend sacrifice for others because it contradicts their fundamental programming. Commander Amy Rodriguez, now serving as the liaison between human and elven tactical planners, saw the implications immediately. So if we can coordinate our attacks in ways that demonstrate genuine cooperation rather than just military alliance, we might be able to disrupt their adaptive capabilities. The theory was tested in small-scale engagements as Devourer scout ships probed the outer defenses. When human and elven ships coordinated their attacks in traditional military formation, the enemy adapted quickly and counterattacked effectively. But when the same ships risked themselves to protect each other, making decisions based on mutual aid rather than tactical advantage, the Devourer responses became erratic and confused. Fleet Admiral Janet Cross, recently promoted to overall command of the United Forces, studied the battle reports with professional interest. It works, but it requires a level of trust between species that has never existed before. Asking pilots to put their lives in the hands of beings they met weeks ago goes against every military instinct. Maya Patel had been working on the communication systems that would make such coordination possible. I think I have solved the technical problems. We can create a shared consciousness network using elven biotechnology and human computing power. It would allow crews to literally feel what their allies are experiencing. The first test of the system took place during a major engagement at the Kepler Defense Station. Human, Elven, Thraxian, and Melodian ships linked their consciousness, networks, and engaged a Devourer battle group as a single entity. The results were beyond anything they had hoped for. The Allied ships moved with perfect coordination, each crew able to anticipate what the others needed before they even asked. When a Thraxian ship was damaged, human crews rushed to protect it without orders. When Elven bio ships needed energy, Melodian vessels shared their power reserves without hesitation. The Devourer ships, faced with behavior they could not understand or predict, began making tactical errors. Their adaptive systems, designed to counter selfish competition, could not process the reality of beings who willingly sacrificed for others. For the first time since the war began, an Allied force defeated a Devourer fleet in direct combat. As news of the victory spread through the alliance, hope began to replace despair. But Lyreley, studying long-range sensor reports, knew that the real test was still coming. The main Devourer fleet was approaching the core worlds, and it was larger than anything they had faced before. The ancient warnings spoke of a final battle that would determine the fate of all organic life in the galaxy. That battle was now just days away, and everything would depend on whether the Alliance could maintain its unity when faced with the full might of an enemy that had consumed 1,000 civilizations. Standing on the bridge of the newly christened Unity Station, Lyreley looked out at the largest fleet in galactic history. Ships from 50 different species hung in formation around the massive space station, their different technologies working together in ways that would have been impossible just months before. The exiled scholar had become the prophet whose warnings had saved the galaxy. But the real salvation would come from the unity she had helped to forge, and the courage of beings willing to fight for something greater than themselves. The Nexus system was chosen for humanity's last stand because it controlled the hyperspace, routes to over 200 populated worlds. If the Alliance could not stop the Devourers here, then billions of beings across the galaxy would face extinction. The massive Allied fleet took position around the ancient star, their ships representing the greatest gathering of cooperation in galactic history. Fleet Admiral Janet Cross stood on the bridge of the command vessel Harmony, watching the tactical display as the final preparations were completed. Her weathered face showed the strain of commanding forces from 50 different species, but her voice remained steady and confident. All sectors report ready, Admiral. Beside her, Lyrelay worked at a console that seemed to be part technology and part art. The elven equipment hummed with organic energy as she prepared to activate the ancient defense systems that had been dormant for 3,000 years. The Star Singers are in position throughout the fleet. When I give the signal, we can begin the harmony. Dr. Helen Park was monitoring the quantum resonance generators that would amplify the cooperative consciousness network across the entire Allied force. Admiral, we are reading perfect synchronization between all ship systems. The integration is holding steady even under combat stress. Captain Diana Foster, commanding the assault squadrons, checked in from her fighter wing. Strike. Teams Alpha through Omega are ready for deployment. The mixed crews have been training together for weeks. They know each other's moves better than their own. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of locusts descending on a field of grain. There were thousands of ships, each one massive and wrong, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with the combined technology of countless conquered civilizations. At their center was a vessel so enormous it barely seemed possible, a world ship that dwarfed even the largest space stations. Commander Stephanie Liu, now piloting an advanced hybrid fighter that combined human engineering with elven biotechnology, felt her ship respond to her emotions as the enemy appeared. Contact. Enemy fleet detected. They are bigger than our worst estimates. The Devourer fleet moved with the coordinated precision of a single organism, which in many ways it was. Each ship was connected to the others through quantum networks that allowed instantaneous communication and adaptation. They had perfected the art of war through the consumption of 1,000 military traditions. Admiral Cross opened the fleet-wide communication channel, her words reaching every crew member in the Allied force. This is it. Everything we have worked for comes down to the next few hours. Remember, we are not just fighting for our own species. We fight for the right of life to exist in this galaxy. The battle began with long-range exchanges, as both fleets tested each other's capabilities. The Devourers opened fire with weapons. That bent space itself, creating gravitational shears that could tear ships apart on a molecular level. The Allied forces responded with coordinated volleys that combined Thraxian plasma beams, human antimatter torpedoes, and elven bioenergy bursts. But as the ancient texts had warned, conventional weapons were not enough. The Devourer ships absorbed the damage and adapted, their hulls becoming resistant to each type of attack after experiencing it once. Within minutes, the Allied firepower was having minimal effect. Now, Lyrelay called out, her hands dancing over the Star Singer controls. Begin the harmony. Across the fleet, consciousness networks activated and merged. Suddenly, every crew member could feel the presence of their allies, their hopes, fears, and determination. Human pilot Diana Foster found herself experiencing the complex harmonic thoughts of a Melodian navigator. Thraxian engineers felt the passionate protective instincts of elven warriors. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and dramatic. Their perfect coordination began to break down as their adaptive systems encountered something they could not process. How do you counter an attack where the attackers are willing to sacrifice themselves for beings they had met just weeks before? Captain Lisa Zhang, commanding a mixed squadron of human and elven ships, led the first major assault. Her vessels moved with impossible coordination, each ship anticipating the needs of the others. When elven bioships needed energy, human vessels shared their power cores without hesitation. When human ships were damaged, elven crews used their biotechnology to heal the mechanical systems. The Devourer response was confused and erratic. Their ships began firing on empty space, their targeting systems unable to predict the movements of crews who were acting for mutual benefit rather than individual survival. Dr. Cole, monitoring the battle from the science station, watched in amazement as the enemy fleet began to show signs of system failures. "Admiral, their ships are actually damaging themselves. Their adaptive protocols are creating feedback loops because they cannot model cooperative behavior." But the Devourers were not defeated yet. The massive world ship at the center of their formation began to change, its hull flowing and reshaping itself into something new. Weapon ports the size of city blocks opened along its surface, revealing technology harvested from civilizations that had fallen millions of years ago. "All ships, evasive action," Admiral Cross ordered as beams of pure entropy lanced out from the world ship. Where they struck Allied vessels, matter simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but edited out of reality itself. The massive ship targeted Unity Station, the command center of the Allied fleet. The entropy beams struck the station's shields and began eating through them like acid through paper. In seconds, the entire structure would be consumed. Without orders, without planning, ships from a dozen different species moved to intercept the beam. They positioned themselves between the world ship and the station, allowing their own hulls to be consumed so that others might survive. Lyrelai watched in wonder as Thraxian cruisers, human destroyers, and elven bioships died together to save beings they had never met. This is what the ancients meant. True unity is not just working together. It is being willing to become something greater than yourself. The sacrifice had an unexpected effect on the Devourer world ship. Its massive bulk began to convulse as its central consciousness tried to process what it was seeing. For millions of years, it had consumed civilizations driven by fear, greed, and self-preservation. But this behavior was beyond its understanding. Maya Patel, working frantically at the communication station, detected something incredible. "Admiral, the enemy ships are broadcasting on their internal networks. I think they are actually arguing with each other." The Devourer fleet was fragmenting, as different ship minds encountered the paradox of selfless cooperation. Some vessels continued to attack with mechanical persistence, but others began to hesitate, their adaptive systems locked in recursive loops as they tried to understand an enemy that fought to protect rather than to destroy. Seizing the moment, Admiral Cross ordered the final assault. "All remaining ships, converge on the world ship. We end this now." The Allied fleet, reduced to less than half its original strength, came together for one last attack. The consciousness network reached perfect harmony as thousands of beings from dozens of species shared a single purpose. Captain Foster led her fighters in close to the world ship's surface, using her bio-enhanced reflexes to navigate through defensive fire that would have destroyed any normal pilot. Behind her, bomber squadrons from every allied species worked together to target the massive vessel's critical systems. Lyrelai activated the final protocol from the ancient texts, using the Star Singer network to turn the Nexus system's own star into a weapon. Solar energy, channeled through elven biotechnology and focused by human precision, struck the world ship in frequencies that disrupted its quantum coherence. The massive vessel began to come apart, but not from external damage. Its own internal conflicts were tearing it apart as different sections tried to process incompatible behavioral models. The unified consciousness that had held the ship together for eons was fragmenting under the weight of a paradox it could not resolve. As the world ship died, its destruction sent shockwaves through the quantum network connecting the Devourer fleet. Ship after ship began to shut down as their central programming collapsed. Some vessels simply went dark, their crews falling into dormancy. Others turned and fled back toward the galactic rim, their adaptive systems choosing withdrawal over continued exposure to the cooperative paradox. In the end, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known was defeated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the simple act of beings choosing to trust and protect each other across the barriers of species and culture. The aftermath of the battle was a time of mourning and celebration in equal measure. The dead numbered in the millions, but their sacrifice had saved billions. Memorial services were held on dozens of worlds, with representatives from every allied species paying tribute to fallen heroes. Lyrelay stood in the rebuilt council chamber on Ethermoor, no longer an exile but honored as the keeper of ancient wisdom. Around her, the High Council had been expanded to include representatives from every species in the Alliance. The old isolation was gone forever, replaced by a commitment to shared knowledge and mutual defense. Captain Zhang, now promoted to Admiral of Exploration, was planning new missions to contact species in distant galaxies. Carrying the message of cooperation to civilizations that had never known such unity was possible. Dr. Cole headed the new Institute for Cooperative Technology, where scientists from dozens of species worked together to develop innovations that no single civilization could have achieved alone. And in the outer reaches of the galaxy, monitoring stations kept constant watch for signs of new threats. The Devourers had been defeated, but the universe was vast and full of dangers. The Alliance would be ready. As Lyrelay looked out at the stars from her tower on Ethermoor, she reflected on the words of the ancient texts that had proven prophetic, in ways she never expected. The stars did remember, but more importantly, they had learned. The galaxy was no longer a collection of isolated civilizations struggling alone against the dark. It had become something greater, a community of worlds united by the simple truth that cooperation was stronger than any weapon and hope more powerful than fear. The age of unity had begun, and the stars themselves bore witness to what could be accomplished when beings chose to see past their differences and work together for the greater good.